And then I fully came to understand and embrace my identity as a trans man through my research into Lou Sullivan. I was 24 years old at the time. I took a history course on a whim. I needed an elective, and the course I was taking was on gender and American history. And I knew that something I wanted to look into was transgender history. Well, of course, I quickly found out that as a field, it didn't necessarily exist. I mean, as we all know, we've been around forever, but there was very little that had been done in the way of transgender history at that point. And I went into our university library. I was looking for anything having to deal with trans people. They put every single book that had any reference to trans folks whatsoever. They had it all in one section, took up about 3 feet of space. And it seemed like as I was looking through all these various books, that fully a third of them referenced Lou Sullivan.
So we're dealing with history, queer history to be specific. And as a field of study, it is relatively new. Not for lack of trying, or to even imply that it is this modern invention. No, as a field of study, queer history is difficult at times due to a multitude of factors. Some of them being difficulty with primary sources, as well as lack of funding, social taboo, social ostracization that could happen into individuals who study, let alone discuss these topics, um, or even, the historically documented cases of political scapegoating to the point where there's censorship to outright destruction of literature that formally references queer people. So there's that. Our understanding of sex and gender has evolved a lot over the years, throughout millennia. For example, in ancient Greece, it was common to believe that women were just deformed versions of men. And in the 1800s, especially in the Victorian England era, it was very common to assume that a man was homosexual if he were to go down on his wife. So, needless to say, you can conclude that our common ethos for what sex and gender has and what it is has changed a lot over the years. In this journey overall, I want you to have the fullest context about what you will be experiencing today. The terms that people used in the past to describe themselves differ a lot from how we describe ourselves today. Words evolve alongside us, and our understanding evolves with them. They were just working with what they had, like every human in the history of ever, especially etymology wise. So, we're going to go over some of these key terms as well as some of the context behind them. Key terms. First up on the docket, we have transgender. Simply put, this is just someone who does not identify with their assigned sex at birth. This encompasses people who wish to medically transition and maybe don't care about medically transitioning. It is just a description. Most of the time, you can just say trans. Do not say transgenders or transgender. That just makes you sound ignorant. Transgender, it is simply an adjective for someone. He is a trans man, she is a trans woman, they are a trans person, etc., etc. These next two terms we would consider pretty outdated. However, for this discussion, we will need to go over them. So that's why they're here. Transsexual, shortened to TS. We consider this outdated and a pejorative, and this was understood to be an individual who takes social and medical steps to transition, as opposed to transvestite, shortened to TV in our terms. Transvestite was understood to be an individual who takes social steps to transition, but not medical steps. And quoting, a transvestite requests nothing from the medical profession unless he wants a psychiatrist to try and cure him. Quoting Dr. Henry Benjamin. We'll get more heard from him later. WPATH, or WPATH, stands for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, formerly known as the Henry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association. That is a mouthful. Also known as BIGDA. This is a professional organization that leads to provide gender her affirming care that is evidence based, as well as providing education and support to communities and those affected. It has been around since 1979, is currently suing the FTC, and provides the standards of care for transgender and gender diverse people across the board. HIV, also known as human immunodeficiency virus, is a retrovirus that attacks our immune system. HIV isn't the death sentence that it formerly was. You can live a full, happy life living with HIV. However, there is no cure or vaccine as we know of currently. If left untreated, this can develop into AIDS. AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. When you look into AIDS, you will find that more often than not, the victims of this illness will be listed as they died from complications of AIDS. This is due to how the virus affects the body. A common cold turns into a deadly battle for those with immunodeficiency. Their normal white blood cells aren't at the same level as they typically would expect. I'm sure this is something that we can reflect on given the circumstances of our last decade. And finally, I am not a historian, and I don't claim to be. I'm just a guy who has a passion that he wants to share, and I put a lot of time, effort, and energy to ensure that I got all my bases covered and that I was giving the world correct information. So if I got anything incorrect or need more context on something, as I am an fallible individual who will most likely fail at things in the future, please feel free to comment as such. The only thing that I won't tolerate is going to be transphobia. If I even smell any of that, you're probably going to get blocked or deleted. You should probably just watch a different video. It would save you some time. This is going to be a really long experience, so I'm just letting you know now. Okay, let's get into the real video now. Lou Sullivan was born on June 16th, 1951, to John and Nancy Sullivan in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was the third of a total of 6 children to the Sullivan family, that being Kathleen, Johnny, later to go by Flame, Lou himself, Bridget, Mary Ellen, and Patrick. Like many white Americans post-World War II, John, later to go by Jack, and Nancy flew to the suburbs. Using funds that were secured using the GI Bill, they were able to find a home and settle in Wauwatosa, a mostly white neighborhood outside of Milwaukee. As devout Catholics, the Sullivans sent all of their children to Catholic schools throughout their primary education. And since there were 6 of them, the Sullivan children were able to find entertainment and camaraderie amongst themselves. Lou and his sisters, Mary Ellen and Bridget, would mainly entertain themselves with games, one of them being playing boys, where Lou and his sisters would take on boy names and do stereotypically boy behaviors. You know, when I was around 7, 11 years old, my favorite play would be Let's Play Boys. One of us, Bridget, Mary Ellen, or I, would say, "Let's play boys." And we all had boy names, set up pretend surroundings, and acted like boys. I remember a few names I had: Bobby Cordell and Chris Roman. Others were Joseph, Dave. It was real fun. Yeah, that was fun days. Dad called me the ringleader. Whatever I wanted to do, Bridget and Mary Ellen and Patrick would do. I could even get them to clean their rooms without a fuss. We'd make fun of it. Lou by no means was a stereotypical trans man. He wasn't adverse to dolls or dresses, the latter actually being quite difficult to avoid given his Catholic school education. In actuality, Lou was looking forward to his period and the onset of puberty. If anything, at the time, he viewed it as a cure, almost. Once his period would arrive, he would finally turn into the happy, beautiful woman he was meant to be. This kind of revelation would never occur. In fact, after puberty, Lou faced more pressure to stop playing boys, as it were. While his sisters were able to adapt well into teenage girlhood, Lou would find his own forms of self-expression to mold into. During his preteenhood, Lou was one of many affected by Beatles mania. Lou would go on to idolize the Beatles alongside many other heartthrobs of the 1960s, such as Bob Dylan, Lou Reed, and David Bowie. It is through these interests that Lou would come to find solace, as well as interest, in the Guard. The avant-garde was a dark, dingy place with stained glass windows, lots of antiques, and mismatched furniture. The Guard held poetry readings, screened underground films by Andy Warhol and other beatnik artists, and featured bands on the weekends. Mostly, the Guard offered a refuge for people like Lou and Flame who felt ostracized by mainstream society, and it served as a focal point of the counterculture in Milwaukee. It is here at the Guard where Lou would meet Jay, his longest running relationship. Ooh boy. Now is probably the best time to discuss Lou's love life. Lou had a total of 3 notable long-term partners. In the book, We Both Laughed in Pleasure, the collection of selected diary entries of Lou Sullivan. These men are described as J, M, and T. These are all pseudonyms. The first being the previously mentioned J. They were together for about 11 years, from 1968 to 1979, and J was described as thin, long-haired, and effeminate. Then there was M. They never formally dated. It was more so that Lou and Jay were both interested in M as a couple. Lou would stop seeing M a couple of weeks prior to Lou and Jay moving across the country to San Francisco in 1975. Then there was T, and we'll save discussion on him for later. But just know that I do not like any of these guys. In my opinion, Lou had a shitty taste in men. He had an awful taste in men, but they are important to the story at hand, so that is why we are mentioning them. Back to Jay. Getting back to Jay. Jay was a student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He was described as a slender, gender-ambiguous white guy with effeminate mannerisms and a shy demeanor. He wrote poetry for the Beatnik Hub, played harmonica, and Lou was absolutely smitten. In fact, Lou's father, Jack, warned Lou to not go after Jay as he thought he was a homosexual. Little did he know that that would actually entice Lou even more to go after Jay. And Jay would indulge Lou in his gender play fantasies. Could even argue that gender and the exploration of it was some of the foundations of their relationship. They had the kind of relationship where if you saw the two of them walking down the street, you could assume just by their looks that it was 2 boys or 2 girls, but you weren't really sure either way. And that was something that Lou and Jay kind of really liked about their relationship, and it would go back and forth a lot throughout their time together. Lou came of age during the kaleidoscopic late 1960s, when American society simultaneously seemed to be fracturing along lines of ideology and identification, yet also spinning towards a utopian, colorful wholeness. Like so many jewels at the end of the barrel, individuals tumbled within and amongst civil rights, anti-war, and countercultural movements contained by a shared conviction that if they could turn the ways that people thought about race, war, and love, the entire world view regarding power could change. By late high school, Lou had already been active in these movements. By 1968, Lou and his family had participated in a Milwaukee protest that resulted in an open housing law by the end of that April. Late October 1967, Lou had witnessed and even intervened when 20 men stormed and began beating up other attendees at the guard violently, particularly targeting men with long hair and effeminate features. Fall of 1969, Lou, at the age of 18, was at the Moratorium March on Washington at the nation's capital against the Vietnam War. It was there he witnessed police tear gassing the crowds and acts of valor from his fellow protesters. Later, in February 1970, he participated in another protest organized by the Students for a Democratic Society. Police reacted normally, in which I mean they advanced and attacked the peaceful protesters. Liu himself was arrested at this protest and faced harassment from police for his gender nonconformity. A few months later, in May, in response to the Kent State Massacre, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Liu, alongside 3,000 students, faculty, and staff, all went on strike. This strike lasted 6 days. They occupied the Student Union building for 6 days straight. Another thing that I'm sure viewers may find reflects some of today's current events. Post high school, Lou ultimately decided to not get a degree. Instead, he immediately hit the job market and got a clerical position right after graduating. It was this position that would lead him to getting another job at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin's Department of Slavic Languages amidst the Cold War. He had great timing. He had really great timing, this guy, for everything. This job had a few bit of perks to it as well. Not only did he get a salary, but Lou, alongside other faculty members, were able to take classes in the department. So Lou was still able to get some form of a higher education. It was just in a very independent manner. By 1970, the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin's Gay Liberation Organization would make its first entrance into Lou's life. 1973 was one of the worst years for trans liberation on record. However, 1973 was also one of the years where Lou Sullivan was actually able to have the most exploration in his young life. At that time, Jay, his current boyfriend, had moved to Berkeley for grad school. With his boyfriend kind of out of the picture for a moment, Lou was able to have some newfound freedom, and he would frequently go out to bars and experience the nightlife where he would find community, predominantly gay community, because he was going to gay bars. Most of the time, people were pretty accepting of him. A little confused, but they liked him regardless. So what we have to remember is that this was the 1970s, and in the early 1970s, a woman simply wearing masculine clothing was seen as a political statement. Shocking, I know. Rejecting skirts and blouses was seen as rejecting gender stereotypes and taking a stance against inequality. But for Lou, it was less of a political statement and it was more so relating to his own comfortability of self. By early 1973, Lou was full-time cross-dressing, even at work. This was considered a really big deal. However, most people just took it as he was a feminist. So he kind of flew under the radar for the most part. However, he did draw attention Because again, it was the 1970s, and this was still a big deal for a woman to just run around in pants and a blue collared shirt. And he drew the attention of Dorothy, who would be known as his feminist friend, and lead him to further discussions at the Gay People's Union's lesbian discussion group. Oh my god, the lesbian discussion group. Dorothy struggled to understand Lou's identity. They had heated debates and exchanges over the topic of sex and gender. I found it to mirror what trans people and TERFs conversations look like today. There's actually this whole quote that I'm going to show to you. It's a bit lengthy, I know, but I really think that we need the full quote so that we can get the context of everything. I was astonished when I first read it. My high made me lose my inhibitions, and I tied my breasts down so they wouldn't jiggle, although it did little to make them appear smaller. Plus, rolled up a few socks and made myself a penis, pinned it in my underwear. I was ready for them. The talk began with someone saying she disliked groups like GPU because it was dominated by sexist men. One other woman tried to say that they were at least trying to rid themselves of sexism. I said probably if women dominated, or at least were in the majority, women would launch as much sexism against the men. She flatly denied this, saying she was incapable of sexism. Told her that was bullshit, that sexism oppresses men as much as women, and no one could deny that they are sexist just as they can't deny their racism. She denied it anyhow. Also, she told of seeing a drag show and was lost as to why a lesbian, after the show, tipped the female impersonator in approval. She referred laughingly to the impersonator as a shim, pointed out to her that she was displaying sexism right there by ridiculing transvestites. She denied it and said she didn't understand it. I said I couldn't understand why she couldn't understand it. What's so hard to understand about why a man would enjoy dressing and or appearing as a woman, or that a woman may enjoy the art with which he does it with? She had no answer. Another woman said she objected to the adaptation of roles and images that women abandon as artificial. A Dorothy rap. Also, she added, they were so bad at it. I said they certainly know if they're bad at it or not, and even if they are, it doesn't matter. The mere shape they're in is enough to satisfy their need. Also, I don't remember how the topic occurred, but almost everyone was shocked when it was pointed out the majority of transvestites were heterosexual. Someone said they didn't like the idea that one's clothes should be so important to them. I got into a long speech that one's clothing identifies one's feeling. Clothing is a means of expression, and don't you think it's possible for a transvestite, just because he has an identity denied him, to be a full and rich human being? The room was dead silent, and I began feeling conspicuous. Someone said, that's a hard question to answer, and the group broke up in 15 minutes. I hung around, reading a mag put out by gay men into feminism called The Faggot If Feminists. Jay called me over where she and Donna were talking and said I was the only one around there who made any sense and that she was sick and tired of bullshit. That these girls claim they aren't sexist, then ridicule transvestites and transsexuals and everyone else not like them. Despite some of the confrontation, Lou was actually living at his fullest self in this moment. He was really starting to experiment and live freely. However, a lot of this started to change once Jay had returned from Berkeley. Lou found himself struggling to balance his love for Jay and his desire to live as himself. Lou had even expressed and shared with Jay his desire to have a sex change. Jay was not very encouraging towards this. However, he did note that he was attracted to the idea of Lou being like a boy with girls' genitalia. Yeah, weird. This would be one of many times in Lou and Jay's relationship where Jay would put a roadblock in Lou's medical transition. More on that later. Lou's relationships with other men would be a continuous theme throughout his life. He often felt like he couldn't relate or fit in, so he often found himself aligning more with those on the margins of society. He found himself relating to Bob Dylan, Lou Reed, many countercultural movements, which led him to attending countercultural meetings, led him to the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee's Gay People's Union. The Gay People's Union of Milwaukee was formed in the early wake of the Stonewall riots. They served to provide community outreach, support, as well as legal reforms for gay people. And they also functioned on an ideology that differed from their East and West Coast counterparts. You see, at the time, there was a lot more separatism when it came to the gay liberation movement. Gays, lesbians, bisexuals, they were all considered their own separate groups with their own separate movements. Trans people, not even in the discussion at the time. However, GPU and other communities like it saw it differently. They saw gay as an all inclusive term, they saw it more as an umbrella, reflecting more of our modern understanding of these things. So, with that, Lou was able to find more community and support. After attending the women's group and finding them to be rather discouraging towards him, Lou was able to find a lot more support and community throughout the gay men that were around him in his life, especially those a part of the Gay People's Union. Every Monday, Lou would attend general GPU meetings. It was there he not only got a sense of community, but he also gained skills of community organization. He broadened his perspectives by reading the GPU reading list, as well as engaged in discussions with its members. The Gay People's Union brought waves of confidence and new perspectives to Lou. He was welcomed with wide arms and warmth. Through the GPU reading list, he was able to come across such books like The Gay World, Male Homosexuality, and The Social Creation of Evil, City of the Night, and The Transsexual Phenomenon by a certain Dr. Henry Benjamin. I told you we'd come back to him. You just had to be patient, but he's back. We're going to go into it. Dr. Henry Benjamin was a German American endocrinologist and sexologist. He lived from 1885 to 1986. Lived to be 100 years old. That's amazing. Really cool. Moving on. He is most well known for being the guy who pioneered gender affirming care as we know it in the modern sense. Okay? And he did so by opening gender affirming care clinics essentially in New York, San Francisco, as well as publishing this little book called The Transsexual Phenomenon in 1966. Fun fact, one of his clinics in San Francisco was at 450 Sutter Street. If you go to this building today, it's still there. It's this large skyscraper building with huge floors, and it also has this Mayan architecture inspiration to it. Very gorgeous. I highly recommend that you visit it if you're just someone who's a fan of architecture. But there today hosts the Gender Confirmation Center, which is another well-known gender affirming care clinic. So I just thought it was really cool that we have this history of gender affirming care that still lives and breathes today, and out of the same building. that's really cool. But moving on, Dr. Henry Benjamin, while he did a lot for the trans community in terms of advancing medicine and getting doctors and professionals to understand it and have reason, he also did a lot of harm. He produced a lot of strict regimens and standards that were just going to be really difficult for the standard trans person to be able to attain. A lot of his perspectives and evidence went on to be the basis of transmedicalism, frankly, regressive form of what I feel being transgender is. In addition, Dr. Henry Benjamin paid little attention to FTMs within his research, even going on to quote that the female transsexual was rare and of doubtful reality. This is the guy that's supposed to be the expert on this. You can imagine how Lou felt while reading this kind of stuff. So, according to the most informed perspectives at the time, Lou, as a gay trans man, didn't exist. This was the 1970s. Even at the time, there was more information and literature about MTFs than there were about their FTM counterparts. No matter how much information or research that Lou went through, he came up empty handed. But that didn't really stop him from being able to thrive with the other gay men that were around him, especially at the GPU. One meeting, he was approached by a member, Alan Hess. Alan approached him, noticing that he had been despondent and not as talkative. Lou replied, feeling that he didn't feel he belonged there and that he was the biggest pervert of them all. Hess was able to take Lou by the hand and discuss the plight of the transvestites and transsexuals. And from then on, Lou had always had a close friend and confidant. So everything for the most part was going well and good in Lou's life, but he felt a growing discomfort, especially in his surroundings. Like many gay people in the Midwest, he found that there was little space and room for him to grow, especially when it came to gender clinics. There was none of them in the Midwest at the time. He initially had his heart set out on New York City. However, upon his initial visit, he found himself unimpressed. As it happened, Jay had returned from Berkeley and had made plans to go back to Berkeley with Lou. Lou figured that he was going to get everything that he wanted from New York City in the Bay Area, just with the added bonus that the Stanford Gender Clinic was not too far away. On July 19th, 1975, Lou and Jay made their 2-day train ride from Milwaukee to San Francisco. And thus would start the most tormented stage of Lou's life. Initially, Lou loved San Francisco. It was everything that he wanted from New York City. There were 100 gay bars, and that was just the bars. There were hustlers and Queenie men. This was the 70s great gay migration, when young queers like Jay and Lou were flocking to the cities, often gentrifying the neighborhoods in the process. Lou and Jay were able to find an apartment. However, they struggled to find jobs when they moved, especially Lou, as he was looking to do so in masculine dress. Can they really care that much what I wear? I've been implying so nonchalantly, thinking, all these people want is a top-notch secretary, and as long as you don't smell like piss, they don't care what you look like. This is San Francisco. So, cut to October of 1975. He still hasn't found a job. He's feeling really fucking depressed about it. And he's just at the brink of tears, as I would be too. Where does he go during this time of crisis? Why, he goes to this place called the Center for Special Problems. The Center for Special Problems. Where to begin on the Center for Special Problems? I just love the name. So the Center for Special Problems was a unit of the SF Public Health Department. During the War on Poverty of the 1960s, districts like San Francisco's Tenderloin District were deemed anti-poverty zones and were essentially given funds for community development. This was due to the 1964 Equal Opportunity Act. So when this happened, the Central City Anti-Poverty Program office had opened, and thus an MTF activist named Louise Erstrauss came up to the sergeant at the time, Elliot Blackstone, handed him a copy of the transsexual phenomenon, and thus the Center for Special Problems was born. Okay, are we following? We're following. Good. 2 weeks after Lou had first stepped foot at the Center for Special Problems, Lou was able to secure a job at the Wilson Sporting Goods store, on the spot, actually. He then returned to the Center for Special Problems to receive mental health counseling. It was 2 weeks after he begun his therapy that Lou applied for the Stanford Gender Dysphoria program. They would never respond to his inquiry. Lou was feeling really despondent because of this. It was almost like a sign from the universe came down in the form of a newspaper article. And that is how Lou was introduced to this guy named Steve Dane. What happened was he was a teacher for the longest time. He worked in Emeryville. And he even got Teacher of the Year. Like, he was that beloved of a staff member. There just came to a point where he could not deny himself any longer. And he took 6 months of sick leave from his work to transition. And when he came back as himself. He was Mr. Steve Dane. And he was subsequently fired. So, due to this, Steve Dane became a reluctant activist. He was oftentimes the guy that you went to if you needed resources or her references for doctors and such. He knew the game because he had been through it himself. And that is how Lou got in contact with him. However, he would lose contact eventually, for Lou was at this time trying to put some of his transitioning ideals to bed. Lou's transition was always a point of contention for their relationship. They were always fighting about it, and it just came to a head at some point. This is how it would typically. Lou would voice some need or desire to transition again, and Jay would respond discouragingly again. For Jay, Lou's desire to transition, he interpreted all of that as a matter of fashion or low self-esteem. Plus, at the time, you remember how I mentioned the Center for Special Problems? Well, comes back in because Lou was going and getting therapy there, and his therapist kind of gave him some pushback. She presented the idea that possibly his want to transition, this need to be more masculine, was perhaps internalized misogyny. Perhaps he just needed some more woman friends. And Lou, like any person who is trying to help their mental health, he took the advice of his therapist and he started dressing more femme and would be received with praise and reward from Jay. And they kept this up for like a year, 1 year of domestic bliss. It was until like the spring of 1976 that Lou basically was like, I can't live with you anymore. We can still date, but I don't think that we should live with one another. And that's what happened. This is going to be a pretty long quote, what I'm going to show you right now, but I really think it's important so you get more of the character of this guy, because it spoke to me a lot when I was reading it. When I told Jay how I was bored listening to women talk when I wouldn't had men been saying the exact same things, he agreed with me, saying he feels the same way. Which really made me feel put down, and I wonder how much of my self-hatred of my female side has been fed by this same outlook. He said he found it self-indulgent. I began thinking how he and I really aren't getting along all that differently now that I'm being a girl than our conflicts when I felt I was a boy. Jay looks down on women, and that includes me, just as much as I do. Big help he is. We had somewhat of an argument on machismo, and I realized that whereas I romanticize it, fantasize it, though never would want it to be a reality, he would. He believes it all and takes it seriously, where I don't. Scary. He's worried I'll turn into a lesbian if I begin to hang out with women, yet he isn't making himself too enduring. My shrink asked me why I abandoned my pursuit of the switchover, and I told her because I felt smothered by my own fantasy. And as a man, I felt whole on the inside, but uncomfortable on the outside, trying to communicate with others, etc. Now, as a female, I feel empty on the inside, but feel veered to relate to others. That I always felt that had Jay not been around, if he got killed by a train, I would definitely go towards being male. That I'd even hope somehow he'd get out of my life so I'd be free to be a man. Lou's biggest motivator for putting off his transition was the possibility of losing his relationship to Jay. They tried desperately to make it work. They had even opened their relationship towards the end of it. However, both Lou and Jay struggled with jealousy. What would typically happen is whenever Lou would describe or express a desire to transition, Jay would respond to that by acquiring a girlfriend. Yeah, great guy he is. What followed was really just a long, kind of depressing stretch of Lou attempting to be a woman and him absolutely hating it. A lot of this is expressed in some of his diary entries at the time. I honestly think I'm beginning to lose my mind and something has to give soon. Yesterday and today wandered around the streets looking for I don't know what, anything to save me from this sinking emptiness. It's incredible how lonely I am. The gays? How are they to accept me? How do I fit in? The feminists? They always object to my dress. They won't embrace me. The lesbians? But I like men and don't want to jeopardize Jay and Mai's relationship by getting a female lover. The straights? No way. The transvestites? They're all M to F and put the make on me. No friendship possible. I can't relate to anyone. When Lou returned to Milwaukee for a short personal trip, a lot of his friends from the Gay People's Union had seen him and couldn't recognize him. He had changed so much and for the worst. I've returned to San Francisco feeling free of my gender conflict and with an acutely raised desire of Jay. I must pursue my own ideal of the perfect male-female balance and try not to oust one for the other. Somehow, my clothes have regained their fetishistic quality, and I guess Eldon is right. I am a transvestite. Eldon had said to me what happened to the Sheila who went after Charles after the GPU meeting. Eldon asked what happened to that person. So Luke comes back to San Francisco. It's like May of 1978, and he's shifting through some of his newspapers, and he finds an advert. It's called TS/TV Group Meeting for Women, called the Golden Gate Girls. This actually turned out to be a group pretty much entirely made out of heterosexual trans women. Nevertheless, they were very welcoming towards Lou. In fact, the day that he came to the meeting, his first meeting, they all took a vote to rename themselves the Golden Gate Girls and Guys for inclusivity. It's really funny. He really did just get a bunch of like lady friends, and it helped him out a lot. Jay did not respond well to Lou attending these meetings. In fact, he was very against it. Of course he was, and he cited that he felt it was bad for Lou, whatever that means. However, Lou actually stood his ground with Jay. Lou told him that he had no right to make him choose between this group and him, and I'm really glad that he did. Lou would go on to continue being a member of these meetings, and actually, a year later, he became the editor for the newspaper for the group called The Gateway. Lou found community, comfort, and confidence in the Golden Gate Girls and Guys. And it was also there that he met a gay trans man like himself for the very first time. Could you imagine? Could you imagine just how amazing that feels after feeling like you don't exist? After being told by professionals that someone like you doesn't exist, and then meeting somebody that proves it, that you can live and be like that. So cool. So cool. This gave him so much confidence that he even had the confidence to go cruising in the Castro district. October 19th, 1978. Lou received distressing news that would change his life forever. His sister informed him that his youngest brother, Patrick, was wounded in a fatal accident. This tragedy was further prolonged by the treatment that he received in the hospital. It was a deep struggle for the whole Sullivan family. The death of Patrick Sullivan was a reckoning force in Lou's life. Jay didn't want to break up, but Lou realized through this death, it gave him a lot of perspective. It gave him the perspective that he didn't have a lot of time to just spend fighting with Jay. So after 11 years of relationship, they were done. This will not be the last that we see of Jay, unfortunately, as Lou and him continued to have light contact with one another throughout their lives. But as a relationship, they will never be with one another ever again. And after ending this relationship, after a few months, he even continued to try to be a woman until eventually he just realized, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I don't even like this. And thus, we enter into the next phase of Lou's life. So, September 1979, Lou goes to his Golden Gate Girls and Guys meeting wearing a new boys style haircut and sporting a binder fashioned out of a girl. Innovative. From this point onward, Lou was determined to live his life authentically. He was determined to ensure that he wasn't going to pretend. He reconnected with Steve Dane, and Steve Dane was able to help him decipher the medical system and figure out how he was going to get hormones and possibly surgery and everything else that came with transitioning. In October of that year, Lou applied again to the Stanford Gender Dysphoria Program, where he was rejected. He was rejected. So, more than likely, he was rejected because he was gay. If you read the letter, it's really vague because they don't want to say that, but it was basically because he was gay. So, after a distressed and frankly peeved off Lou expressed his grievances to Steve, Steve was able to get Lou a referral for a Dr. Fulmer. Dr. Fulmer was an endocrinologist who helped trans patients in the past. However, he didn't want to give Lou HRT because just guess. Why do you think? Why do you think he didn't want to give him HRT? It's because he didn't have an attraction to women. Yeah. So Lou wasn't going to accept that, and he asked for a second opinion. And Dr. Fulmer sent Lou to Dr. Pomeroy. Dr. Walden Pomeroy was another endocrinologist and sexologist. He was friends to a Dr. Alfred Kinsey, and they co-authored this little thing called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, aka the Kinsey Reports. You may have heard of them. So Dr. Pomeroy's medical practice mainly focused around trans healthcare. In fact, in the 1960s, he worked with Dr. Henry Benjamin in the Tenderloin district at his clinic. So when Lou came to him and presented his conditions, he was totally cool with it, even exclaiming, "It's fine to be gay." Lou was just elated that he could finally find a professional that would take him seriously and give him a chance, only to have his medical transition further delayed due to Dr. Fulmer giving him the runaround for a month and a half, delaying getting his prescription to him. Nevertheless, Lou got his first shot of HRT on November 16th, 1979. In the ass, which he found to be very funny and appropriate. And he took to the changes so well. Let's hear about it. How to express how very good I feel. Despite the real traumatic changes my body is undergoing, I have never felt healthier, stronger, or more energetic or in higher spirits. I can almost feel that female layer of fat dissolving underneath my skin. My arms are becoming hard and rippling, the veins protruding there and on the backs of my hands, my chest, my hips, my thighs becoming hard, dark hairs on my feet and my toes and my wrists, back of hands, on my stomach, all over my legs, and on my ass. And it feels so good. No more guilt or self hate, only total pleasure. Yet my awareness and enjoyment of other people has increased. I love the sound of my voice. I join in a lot. I laugh a lot. I feel intelligent, worthy of attention, open to new ideas, new experiences. I can be silly or wrong or stupid and not feel ashamed. Not even a full year later, July 15th, 1980, Lou has top surgery. Steve Dane recommended a Dr. Edward Falsey's. Lou wrote to Jay to tell him the good news of his surgery date, and Jay wrote back begging him to reconsider that Lou had gone off the deep end this time, and that if Lou went through with this, he could not have a personal face-to-face contact with him ever again. He also wrote and addressed the letter to Lou's dead name. We're dealing with a really classy guy here. Yeah. What I just think is really funny about this situation is that Lou opened that letter from Jay on the bus to his surgery appointment. Like he read that bullshit and was like, okay, well, I'm still gonna go to my surgery now. And he did. It was cool. And from his hospital room, he had a beautiful view of San Francisco. Within the span of 8 months, Lou completely revolutionized himself, internally and externally. After recovering from surgery, August 1980, Lou was able to land himself a job at Arco as an admin aide. But by the summer of 1982, he was able to bump himself up to associate engineering technician. He bumped himself up so much that he got himself a secretary, and he purposely chose a lesbian secretary because he wanted to pay it forward. um, at work, everyone knew him as gay, but nobody knew that he was trans. He was very stealth at work. This was the early 80s in San Francisco, where there were no legal protections for people really, but for white middle class gay men like Lou, there were some protections. People were pretty friendly to you. Things were more built for you. But trans people, not so much. It was something that was still considered, you don't share that. And Lou wanted that to be something that he could disclose personally and not with some of the people that he worked with. I think I should mention the effect world affairs are having on me. I was so wrapped up with the 52 hostages being released from Iran the day Reagan was inaugurated. I haven't felt this one with the nation since Vietnam, or felt so moved by the historical moment since the day the troops pulled out of Vietnam. All around me, I see a swing back to the middle class way. Family, home, security, life decisions. The press is publicizing the Moral Majority Group, which plans an anti-gay campaign here in San Francisco, and I'm ready to fight as a gay man. Americans need to calm down our radicalism, but there's no possibility of swinging that far back into conservatism. This Reagan era definitely is a new age, but one that must be watched carefully. So outside of his job, Lou continued to write and edit for GPU News and the Golden Gate Girls and Guys, The Gateway, till about fall of 1980. That's when he put both of these positions aside so that he could focus more on FTM matters and volunteering at the Janus Information Facility, a trans-focused counseling facility ran by a Dr. Paul Walker. No, not that Paul Walker. this Paul Walker. Paul Walker will be a frequent name in Lou's story. He and Lou became friends at some point, but he's kind of important. When Lou had met Paul Walker, he was acting as the director of the Janus Information Facility. However, this guy has kind of a really extensive history. It's kind of impressive. So he basically pretty much ran the gender clinic at Johns Hopkins University from 1969 to 1976. He also directed the University of Texas's gender program, and now, at this time, he had opened his own private practice in the Bay Area. Dr. Paul Walker himself was also gay. He was also gay. So Lou and him became very close friends. It was while doing volunteer work at Janus that Lou was able to start drafting what would send him into the FTM stratosphere. And that was information for the female to male crossdresser and transsexual. This was basically the trans guy Bible at the time. It was just this little booklet. It had three different editions released in 1980, 1986, and 1990, respectively. This booklet was the baseline for a multitude of topics when it came to transitioning. Tips on how to pass, tips for romance, tips on how to navigate hate the medical system, tips on how to interact with your family or at work. There were testimonials from other people who went through the process if you just wanted to hear someone's story. It got pretty expansive. He became the face for so many trans guys for the first time. He was the first trans guy that a lot of people first saw in this generation. Short story. So when I was a little baby he trans, I scoured the interwebs to try to find all the information that I could about transitioning and how to present myself as male. I would just watch every video and comb through it. When I was actually able to begin my medical transition, I actually felt that I was very well informed. I knew exactly what to expect when it came to this medical process. I even felt more informed than some of the medical professionals that I was interacting with at the time. So with that, I'm very privileged. I can recognize that because this was completely different in the 80s. In the 80s, it was a lot more difficult. It was a lot more figuring it out on your own. It was through the work of grassroots organizing and just a collectives of people coming together and seeing that there's a need that needs to be fulfilled to get me to where I can just easily access my stuff. And even though it is growingly difficult in the States right now and in other places to get healthcare of this kind, I'm still immensely grateful and privileged to be in this position. So you can see why collectives like Janus are really important to have this kind of information. They gave people access to that you could just readily go to. This booklet was a lifeline, and Janus was the first place to distribute it alongside other local Bay Area retailers like City Lights or Good Vibrations. You see the shirt? You see the shirt? You're assessing the shirt? All right, let's move on. So pretty soon, Lou was receiving letters from all over the country. Lou was essentially the first guy that a lot of other trans men first met for anybody who resembled anything close to what their experience was. There were tales of guys making cross-country trips just to meet him. In fact, there were enough trans men rallied together in the spring of 1981 that they were able to throw together a informal meeting in San Jose. And that is where Lou would meet Jude Patton. Lou's life at this period was just peak. He was glowing in the joy of his medical transition. He was receiving success and community through his writing, and he just felt at home. The Pride Parade that he went to that summer would further fuel his joy. He finally felt like he belonged and could identify with those around him. Lou would move in to an apartment that he adored on Valencia Street. And it would also be this summer that he would meet a young man named T. T was Lou's second longest and last relationship. T is described as a young man who was good at printing. He lived in the apartment building that Lou was living with at the time, and Lou kind of instantly fell for him. He wasn't intending to get into any long-term relationships, it just sort of happened. T did not know of Lou's trans status before he disclosed it to him. Lou and T's relationship held passion and love, and I'm sure could be read as the best relationship that Lou would have romance wise. But as a contemporary reader, there were just a lot of moments where I was reading their interactions in Lou's diaries and just did not feel like anyone should put up with anything that was happening there. He would make comments about Lou's genitals, like calling it Fifi, or in general would just treat him like a girl. Um, let's get into some examples that I have here. What I'm about to show you is quite possibly one of the worst interactions that I have ever read about their relationship. Last night did my bi-weekly shot and T walked in my room. Later when I joined him, he asked why I kept poking myself when I know he doesn't like it. I answered, don't even tease me about it, letting him know we've gone through this already. He said he wasn't teasing, that it made him mad. I finally said, let's put it this way. I'd rather lose you than stop my shots. You mean that chemical is more important to you than I am? No, I am more important to me than you are. It pisses me off that we keep having these conversations and it's just he doesn't know what it's done for me. He just thinks if I'd cut back on the shots, I could be his girlfriend and we could get married and it'd all be great. He just doesn't know. I want to put this quote in full context. This was written in 1982. Gay marriage being legalized wouldn't happen for decades, nor was it a priority for activists at the time. This was at a moment in queer rights history where you were gaining some traction, but there was still a lot of work to go. This was at a period where people could very much still lose their careers, lives, and families just for being gay. Hell, Lou's own home state of Wisconsin just became the first state to decriminalize homosexuality that year. So you could imagine what it could feel like to live in this culture, to be gay in this culture that is so vile and cruel and hatred towards you that reach out for any grasp of normality that you could get. From T's perspective, it seemed like Lou detransitioning would be the easiest way for them to accomplish that level of normality. But for Lou, that wasn't an option. He had worked so hard for so long to get him to where he was now, there was no way he could go back even. However, he would sacrifice a lot of his own self for T's comfortability, such as shaving his mustache and having vaginal sex. Lou would go on to have revelations about his relationship with T. I believe I was the victim of sexual abuse in my relationship with T. It was always the way he wanted it, and I wasn't to do anything I wanted. So I would just submit to him, and I was glad he would have anything to do with me. As their relationship went on, Lou's bottom dysphoria made its presence more apparent. Sometimes I feel I'll have to lose T in order to have cock surgery. Like I felt I had to lose J to take hormones. Maybe yes, maybe no. I must think of me, though. Suddenly, during this period with T, Lou's father, Jack Sullivan, would enter an ailing state. Jack had suffered an aneurysm, which led to all of the Sullivan siblings getting on the next plane, train, and car to gather around their father. They spent the next several days in the hospital with him, which proved to help in some regard. All I saw of my dad was a brightly shining spirit stricken with a fallen body. He talked to me a lot. Silly things, kidding around. He is so glad I came. That alone is worth the $400 airfare. He didn't say one lefty thing to me the whole time I was here yesterday, but he was disoriented, as is expected with any intense head pain. He said, Lou, here's one thing he wants to say, and that's do what you want to do and don't give a fuck. What anyone else say, just do what you want to do. And I just want to say, yeah, Dad, you should know. You waited too long to do what you wanted. As Jack was seemingly on the up and up, the Sullivan siblings made their way to head back home. However, when they updated their father on this, Lou described the following on Jack's reaction. They decided to stay a couple more days. The following morning, Jack had another aneurysm burst and died. In the summer of 1983, Jack Sullivan died at the age of 63. Much like with the death of his brother Patrick, grief was a reckoning force in Lou's life, and it followed him back to San Francisco. In his inheritance money, Lou was actually able to receive enough funds to pursue bottom surgery, something that seemed so unbelievably unattainable was suddenly so clear, and thus beginning Lou's bottom surgery saga. So Lou struggled to find someone to help him with bottom surgery. Like he did before, the medical system just did not want to deal with the first gay trans man. They just didn't want to operate it. They didn't want to risk it. He applied to the Stanford Gender Dysphoria program again, and he was rejected again. Steve Dane continued to be an outlet for Lou to express his grievances throughout this process. Both felt that it was really unfair for medical professionals to uphold such a strict, unattainable process for patients when they're just trying to enrich their lives. They didn't feel that medical professionals should have the right to deny someone any type of care just because they don't meet those types of rigid standards. And in addition to this, Lou and T's relationship just continued to have tension growing in it, and not in the good way. There was discord within their bedroom as T would insist on having sex the way he preferred it and continued to dismiss Lou's desires for bottom surgery. In general, just being kind of a dick. T says I got my priorities mixed up. I should buy a typesetter before I get this wiener operation. What a riot! Amidst his bottom surgery blues, Lou and his community were also suffering through another loss, for they had lost one of their community members through suicide. And less than a year later, they lost another through the same way. Through this difficult time, Lou was able to work on the second edition of the FTM booklet. It was at this time that he also began his work on Jack B. Garland, another Bay Area historical trans man from the 1900s. Lou was struggling to find representation of himself, and he wanted to work on these projects to ensure that others could see that we had a history and that you could see yourself in history. This was 1985. AIDS had just made reference in Lou's journals by this time, but he had no idea that he was already infected with it. Eventually, Lou would come to meet a doctor, Michael Brownstein, and he would be the one to perform Lou's bottom surgery. Dr. Brownstein was a Chicago-born plastic surgeon who primarily specialized in gender-affirming care. If he sounds familiar to you, it's probably because he was the guy that a lot of older trans guys went to back in the day. So there's references to him everywhere. That's actually how Lou first came into meeting Dr. Brownstein. He went to him for a top surgery, correction surgery. And when he found out that he could do meta, they made it work. With that, on April 22nd, 1986, Dr. Brownstein performed a metoidplasty with testicular implants on Lou. I'll be in the hospital only one night. He said $5,000? Great. So his secretary phoned in the implants and made sure they could get him in soon, then phoned and scheduled me into the hospital for surgery Tuesday, April 22nd. I looked between my legs to say goodbye, like I did when I said goodbye to my breasts, but I don't see anything to say goodbye to. The tight pants that I may not be able to wear anymore. T had a terrible reaction when I said next Tuesday. He said it was too soon and that he needed more notice than that. I asked him what the hell he needed more notice for. No, I cannot rely on him for anything for me while recovering from my surgery. But Bridget and Mary Ellen are very willing to be on call for me, and even Flame, Kathleen, are offering their place for me to come over. Plus, Flame will nurse me too. I am ready. T asked me how I know I'm ready. I can just tell. I am finishing what I began 6 years ago. And when he woke. So I'm finally a man. Went to the hospital yesterday morning. Brownstein came in dressed in a 1930s styles gangster. He's really handsome. Clothes carrying a box. He asked if it was okay if he took photos of the surgical process because it really is innovative. I eagerly consented, hoping it will benefit others. I don't remember anything after being wheeled into the operating room. So, with catheter bag in hand, I came home Wednesday afternoon, waddled into my place. T gave me no special notice or attention. Bridget dashed in about 7 p.m. to give me dinner. Mary Ellen came later, and I got up and washed my hair. In the middle of the night, I took my first painkiller. My crotch was burning. I had a dream in the middle of the night that the catheter came out and I was peeing all over everything. This morning, Bridget popped in with donuts, coffee, and a newspaper. Steve Dane called back and we talked a long time. He takes care of people who have no one else after love operates on them, so he knows post-surgery well. Said I could probably take a shower. He said he didn't want to see it until I was all healed and the hair grown back. I don't blame him, 'cause it ain't a pretty sight right now, and I sure don't need him to get that first impression of it. Lou's recovery was going well and good till about 2 weeks post-op when Lou's left testicle implant rejected. It was immediately removed. 2 months later, Dr. Brownstein attempted another implant. It rejected again. Brownstein says I must wait for 6 months before he'll try to put in another testicle. I feel the year was shot, that I better reprioritize all those things I've been putting off until I'm all healed up. Doesn't seem that that will be until 1987. Of course I feel sorry for myself, but I am happy I have something. Dr. Brownstein wanted to hold off to let Lou's body recover, essentially. To help Lou through this difficult recovery period, he joined a gay men's disability support group. And after 5 years of a relationship, Lou and T broke it off. Their relationship eroded for a variety of different factors, but ultimately it came down to T's unwillingness to accept Lou's bottom surgery. So, on November 26th, 1986, Lou moved out of their shared apartment on Valencia Street to another apartment in the Valencia Street corridor, and that would be his last apartment. Lou was ending 1986 with a new motto, and that was, Today is the first day of the rest of your life. And how true that motto would be. It wasn't until a month later, after settling in, that some of Lou's colleagues at the GLGBT Historical Society had noticed that Lou wasn't feeling well and insisted that he go see a doctor. Lou would ride his motorcycle to a free clinic that he knowed of. They told him to essentially go to the ER, where his sister Mary Ellen picked him up to take him to the ER, where Lou would be at the UCSF Medical Center for the next couple of weeks. Well, diary, I didn't think I'd be writing my last chapter so soon. My penmanship's pretty bad because I have an intravenous needle in my wrist and I'm in the hospital. I have AIDS. When doctors first gave Lou his test results, they gave him anywhere from a few months to a few years to live. What followed Lou after this was a blur of anticipatory grief stricken with those around him. It really hasn't hit me that I'm about to die. I see grief all around me, but inside, I feel serene and a certain kind of peace. All my life, I've wanted to live as a gay man, and it's kind of an honor to die from the gay men's disease. The gender clinics decided I couldn't live as a gay man, but I'm going to die like one. Lou would go on to repeat some iteration of that phrase till the day he died. It's also known as one of the most metal quotes ever. Lou found himself yet again considered a medical anomaly by professionals. He was considered by most as the first trans gay person living with AIDS. The first one, I guess. While receiving treatment at the UCSF AIDS clinic, he was taken on by a Dr. Harry Hollander. Lou was considered a special case, and he was given AZT, which was a medication that he was supposed to take every 4 hours indefinitely. The only easy part of this situation seemed to be Lou filing for disability. Despite his diagnosis, Lou was determined to follow through when it came to his bottom surgery, as was Dr. Brownstein. However, this wasn't without its hardships. When Lou told Dr. Brownstein of his status, he, of course, was sorry for Lou, but held a lot of reservations on moving forward. He was very concerned about himself. Would he get AIDS if he stuck himself with the needle he'd used to sew me up? And he said a black nurse who'd be attending agreed to sew me up if he didn't want to. Pissed me off. I asked if this was a normal occurrence that he's sticking himself with needles. He, of course, said, no, but... Regardless, Lou's bottom surgery saga was finally complete. His bottom surgery saga was finally complete. He could move on. Lou's brother Flame actually helped him a lot during this recovery period, and the relationship would continue to grow closer throughout this chapter of Lou's life. Lou's health was steadily on the decline around 1985, so by the time that he was diagnosed, things had heavily progressed. I am feeling strong and fine, but there's something wrong with my taste buds or my saliva. Most dairy products taste sour to me, especially cottage cheese, sour cream, sometimes butter, milk, cheese, cream. It's too bad because those are the things I mostly eat. It's been this way since I've gotten sick, but I thought it'd go away. It's only gotten worse. Lou was given very little time to live, so he was determined to prolong the amount of life that he could have. He signed himself up for as many experimental treatments as possible, such as AZT. Just took my first dose of AZT. It's only an experimental use, and in fact, this evening's newspaper headlines say FDA approves first AIDS drug. AZT attacks virus, slowed progress of diseases in. It says 5,000 is 1/4 of all AIDS patients. The worst part of the article says PCP patients, that's what I had, usually live an average of 40 weeks from the first time the infection first appears. The drug extends the number of months between the first and second bout of infections. Few survive their third infection. 40 weeks. Less than a year. This is just too brutal to be real. The good news is I weighed in at the doctor again, and I'm 131 pounds. That's 5 pounds up in a month. That is wonderful news because the really sick guys are losing weight. I have only 2 pairs of pants that fit my 31-inch waist now. I've got all 29-inch waist pants. Seems a shame to buy a new pair of pants only to wear them for 40 weeks. Another side effect of AZT is that it makes you have weird dreams. He would go on to write about his foreboding dreams leading up to his death. Lou joining the Gay Men's Disability Group actually proved to be one of the most helpful things that he could have done for himself. Like in other groups that he had joined in the past, he became very active in it, and come the summer of 1987, Lou was participating in the SF AIDS Memorial March. He was fully enthralled in it. And just before Lou's 36th birthday, he would attend a photo gallery featuring Jim Wegler's photo exhibit, featuring, at the time, it was 60 men and women diagnosed and living with AIDS. As of now, it is over 100 people that he documented. Yesterday I drove my motorcycle about 30 miles to Redwood City down the El Camino Real to see the photograph exhibit. All 60 close-up facial photos Jim Wigler took of men and 2 women diagnosed with AIDS were on display in the San Mateo County Hall of Justice, and will be there for another month. He had black ribbons on 5 of them, and it took me a while to realize they meant they were already dead. I wanted to stand and stare at my photo and read the words over and over. But it seemed like everyone else there, and the place was mobbed, wanted to do the same thing. For sure, people lingered looking at my photo. I'm sure it was because it was the first time they'd seen a female to male. I got the feeling people recognized me, so I didn't want to stand and stare at my own photograph. But my face was so masculine, and my eyes looked truly sad. Lou was on the upswing until about Christmas of 1988. After a multitude of tests, doctors basically came up empty-handed every single time, citing that was just the nature of AIDS. So Lou, again, was just struggling on his own. After he was diagnosed with AIDS, Lou did reach out to a Dr. Ira Pauly. Dr. Ira Pauly was the head of the University of Reno Sexual Science Department, and Lou wished to meet with him to provide him his own self as evidence that the female to gay transsexual existed. And in 1988, Dr. Pauly and Lou would have their first interview. They would hold another recorded interview a year later in 1989, and then have their last interview in 1990. Throughout this video series, you can see how detrimental the disease was on Lou. You can see how gaunt his face slowly becomes. Lou was alone for much of his life. Despite all the organizing and casual cruising, Lou really struggled to find others that he could really relate to, in the sense of Lou struggled to find someone who would make him feel like he wasn't the only one. But Lou was able to construct that for himself. And while he didn't gain a greater sense of community for that until years before his death, he was surrounded by love. As briefly mentioned before, Lou hosted FTM get-togethers every 3 months in the Bay Area. Before his death, there was a total of 16 meetings. At these meetings, Lou was oftentimes the first FTM that others had ever met. He would give information on resources, tips for passing, and in general just created a network of connection for so many trans men. Lou hosted a total of 16 FTM get-togethers, but his most momentous one being the last FTM get-together. The last FTM get-together was very notable as it was the first Midwest get-together, and it took place in Lou's childhood home. Lou's mom was very delighted to see that there was another parent there to support their kid. And Lou had such dedication for this that he continued to work on the FTM newsletter and FTM booklet up until his death. There were points where, even though he was in the hospital, he was still writing. He asked someone to bring him his typewriter so that he could just work in bed. And as Lou's health deteriorated, his fellow FTMs lent a hand. A younger FTM that he knew, Dennis, would actually volunteer himself to be an in caretaker for Lou. Lou had three goals before he croaked: publish the third edition of the FTM booklet, publish his biography on Jack B. Garland, and publish his personal diaries. He was able to accomplish 2 out of 3 of those goals, so I'm going to say he had a pretty good batting average. From his deathbed, Lou bestowed the duties of the FTM meetings to Dennis and Jameson Green. After Lou's death, the FTM group became FTM International, where it later evolved into the Lou Sullivan Society. It survived until 2010, and it became the longest running FTM support group in history. Lou made many arrangements before his death, mainly being cremation fees, funeral services, and donating his entire collection of personal diary entries to the GLBT Historical Society for them to be archived and published posthumously. I'm sure there's a lot more I should be writing here, but I'm going to sign off here now. Signed, Lou Sullivan. Journal entry, February 27, 1991. Before you is Lou Sullivan's final home, his apartment on Albin Street. Much like when Lou's father had passed, Lou needed permission to die. His sister Mary Ellen held him in her arms and said, "It's okay. You can go." As Lou lay on his last dying breaths. In the early morning on March 2nd, 1991, Lou passed away due to AIDS complications. This year 2026, it would have been his 75th birthday. Lou's closest friends and family gathered on Pier 40 in San Francisco to disperse his ashes into the waters of the San Francisco Bay. Later, at his celebration of life, approximately 100 people were in attendance with the mourners, many of which were from organizations that Lou had personally worked with during his time that he shared with us on this earth. And a month later, at the 17th FTM get-together, it was more so a second memorial service for Lou. It was another opportunity for the members of the group to mourn with one another, many of which who were in attendance spoke of how Lou impacted their lives and the sense of loss that they felt without him. MTF issue 14 was the last of the group's newsletter that Lou ever worked on. So, MTF 15 was dedicated to him. And even the following issue featured tributes to Lou. The entire community was in mourning. Lou accomplished so much in the short time that he shared with us on this earth. He founded FTM International. He was an outstanding community leader, greeting everyone with kindness and warmth. He always greeted people with love and acceptance. He has affected so many people's lives, and yet whenever I've talked about this and told people that I was making this video, they had no idea who I was talking about, which is really insane to me. Like, even other queer people, they did not know who Lou Sullivan was. To me, that's really insane because he was a prolific writer. In We Both Laughed in Pleasure, the published collection of his personal diary entries, this is less than a fourth of his total diary entries. This book is 419 pages long. He wrote down everything. And it's a little gratuitous, too. This is a very not safe for work book. He goes into all of it. It's very atypical when we're studying history that we find a figure who has wrote down such a detailed, extensive description of their innermost thoughts. We don't get that a lot. In fact, what I found very compelling about this collection of diary entries is that the editors included a lot of Lou's not so good moments. There are moments where he displays genuine misogyny, racism, sexism, and even transphobia, as well as fatphobia. There are like some genuine moments in there where he's misgendering other trans people. Like he misgenders Steve Dane, Jack B. Garland, and several others. So if you personally read his diaries like I did, there's going to be some moments where they kind of make you cringe. But this was on purpose, okay? To quote some of the editors, I get it. He's developing new ways of thinking. He evolves a lot over the course of this story as well. In many ways, developing this new understanding of language in some isolation without anyone to say, like, hey, that's actually kind of a cringy move of you to do that. He was thinking through all of it alone with his diary. And he was. Lou Sullivan started transitioning in the late 70s, early 80s, a time where a lot of trans folks were often told the best course of action for them is to literally fade into the woodwork of society after they've undergone their medical transition. Get a divorce, cut off your family, change your full name, move somewhere where nobody has known you in the past. Treat it as if your pre transition self is dead. And medical professionals heavily encourage this perspective too. In fact, some doctors would intentionally make it difficult for their patients to transition, often having parameters that would make it really difficult or just straight up uncomfortable for the patient themselves. One example is this trans man who started transitioning in the early 70s, and a doctor required him to get a monthly pap smear. Lou Sullivan was also instructed to get a pap smear during one of his consultations. If you don't know, that's fucking weird, and you do not need to do that. That is not a normal ask of your doctor to do. Transitioning today looks a lot different than it did in the 70s and 80s. And this is partially due to the work that trailblazers like Lou Sullivan put in. It was the work that everyday people saw that there was a lack of support and resources. They saw a need and they fulfilled it, and they ensured protections and resources for those who came after them. I directly benefit from the work that activists like Lou Sullivan put in years before my own birth. I moved to the same San Francisco that Lou Sullivan had moved to over 40 years prior. I had moved with the goal of starting my medical transition. However, I didn't need to apply to a university program and cross my fingers to see if they'd accept my life story as good enough. No. You see, for me, there was this historically known gender clinic that was by my college. It was very accessible, and all of the nurses were some variety of queer. I was able to start my medical transition through an informed consent model. And this is a model where adult patients with proper education can determine if treatment is necessary and needed for them. This is a model that is recommended by WPATH. I did not have to lie about my orientation, nor did I have to lie about the gender of my partner or my relationship with femininity, none of that. After my first appointment, I'm pretty sure it only took 2 months for me to get my prescription, and that was just because of blood work things. It wasn't because my doctor was trying to give me the runaround or insist that I didn't know what I was doing with myself. I didn't have to pay out of pocket for my tests or prescription because I'm privileged and lucky enough to be living in a state that guarantees it. Each time I pick up my HRT prescription, or I admire the changes in a mirror, or I feel relief when people don't hassle me over my ID, I am grateful for the work that Lou Sullivan, Sylvia Riviera, Liz Feinberg, and Marsha P. Johnson, and many others did. Each June, I make sure I take the time to acknowledge all the work it took for us to get to where we are today. And each time this month ends, I ask myself, what am I going to do to ensure that it's going to be better for future generations? Because I'm pretty sure the people I just mentioned were thinking that at some point too. And every time I look out to the waters that rock the San Francisco Bay, I think of Lou. Despite never meeting him, I see him everywhere. I see him in the bright faces of colorful, short young men that I meet on the street. I see him in the hidden corners of spaces that we've made for ourselves. I see him in the summer sunlight that smiles down on us each pride. It's as if he's here with me and all the other young queers who race to the Bay Area in search of meeting their authentic selves. I'm sure there's a lot more I should be writing here, but I'm going to sign off here now. I just want to say happy birthday, Mr. Lewis Graydon Sullivan. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. This is my first attempt at a project like this, and I think I definitely learned a lot about my creative process and timing with this one. I was aiming for this to be an hour long, like under an hour. And as we can see, that did not happen. But that's okay. I'm planning on making more videos of this nature and subject matter in the future. However, this took me like 4 months to make. So if you want more regular updates about my projects or just want to support what I do, you can support me on Patreon. I just launched this, so it's very bare bones right now, but I plan to make it a little bit more presentable in the future. Definitely a work in progress. Otherwise, here are my socials. I make art generally, and I'm trying to make art in a sustainable way for both myself and financial reasons. So I hope you can come with me along that journey. I want to say thank you to all my friends who helped me shoot the B-roll footage. We got to get to know San Francisco really well, and it was fun to just muck around the city. Another special thanks to Kat, who let me essentially use all of her equipment for all of this. This entire video would not exist without her. Big thank you to historians like Ellis Martin, Zach Ozma, Susan Stryker, and Dr. Bryce D. Smith. These are the people behind the two books that I used as my primary sources, and the wealth of knowledge that I received from the products of their labor is something that I will always hold gratitude for. The voice that you heard in the beginning actually was Dr. Bryce D. Smith. That clip came from Stealth, a transmasculine podcast, where he made an appearance discussing his research into making this very book because there was no other books on Lou Sullivan until he went and got a degree so that he could write it. I really recommend that you listen to the show. I adore this show. All of the interviewees are people on the transmasculine spectrum. They're all older and talk about their experiences with transition. Some of them even transitioned before Lou did. Like, that's amazing. And they tell about their lives, getting older, and yeah, please listen to it so that I can have other people to talk about it with. Thank you to my life coach. You've been really helping me to get balance into my life, as well as a tremendous thank you to my fiance for all the love and support that they've given me through this project. This was supposed to be uploaded on the 16th because it was Lou's 75th birthday, but that didn't happen. So I figured getting it out this month was just as impactful. I hope you enjoyed it and tell more people about Lou. So until next time.